In the middle of a battlefield blanketed in white snow, a lone figure stood towering over heaps of corpses, an intense killing aura radiating from his body. Without turning around, he coldly addressed the one who had just appeared behind him. The old man glanced sideways and asked why he was there when he should have been leading the conquering army in the east. As lowered his head, clenched his fist tightly, and through gritted teeth replied that he had come to defeat him. At that open declaration of war, the man he called father curled his lips in disdain. His reddish eyes remained utterly calm as he slowly drew a bloodstained sword, with a strained voice, as accused him of having planned to use his army as bait from the very beginning and shouted, asking if he was wrong. Father, he cried. The man admitted it without hesitation, his tone indifferent and mocking, saying that such was the purpose of those without wings. Then he sneered, isn't that right, my foolish son? Each bitter word pierced like a dagger through Aster's heart, igniting the fury within Usha Elmine. Of the Elmine family, the greatest lineage of war gods on the continent, sworn to protect the royal family with their blades. The head of the house, Radric Main, was the only man in the nation who possessed that supreme power, as remembered how this powerful man had once saved his life when he was dying in a blizzard. To repay that debt, he had agreed to do whatever was asked of him, throwing himself into bloody wars without hesitation. Yet his childhood had been nothing but a chain of humiliation and contempt. His brothers constantly mocked him, reminding him that someone without wings like him had no right to hold his head high. For the seal of wings on one's back was the source of magical power. The more wings one bore, the greater one's strength. And so, as the only one in the ducal house unable to use magic, was branded wingless. Despite everything, he devoted himself tirelessly to mastering the sword, turning his body into his only weapon. He always believed that one day his relentless dedication would be acknowledged. In the end, through his own merit, he gained loyal companions who fought at his side, hidden behind a tree, his sharp gaze alert as if sensing a bad omen. He realized too late what was happening. Horror struck him as he saw that the entire army had fallen into a carefully prepared ambush. Painful memories flooded back as he screamed in desperation, demanding to know if this was the reward for his loyalty to the father he had trusted so completely. The only answer was an icy stare. Radric smiled with scorn and asked what an instrument could possibly expect, cruelly declaring that his purpose had been fulfilled and ordering him to disappear. Those words stabbed like 1,000 blades, feeding the hatred blazing in Aster's eyes. Overwhelmed by rage, he charged forward like a madman, raising his sword and shouting, Father. He had trusted him, only to realize how foolish he had been as he unleashed a spinning slash with all his strength against the man who had betrayed him. The sharp blade grazed Radric's neck, drawing a line of blood that, for the first time, caused his expression to shift. But in the next instant, glowing red magical chains erupted from nowhere and bound him in place. His own brothers had attacked him. Even while chained, he swung his sword wildly, cutting down his attackers in his fury. He cried out in pain as the magical chains tightened, blood spilling from the corner of his mouth. Yet his will to fight would not fade. One of his brothers smirked mockingly and asked if he still did not understand. A wingless would always remain a wingless. The three of them, father and son, stood there arrogantly, looking down at him collapsed in the snow. Another brother sneered that crawling on the ground was exactly where he belonged, pressing his hand into the freezing snow, as lifted his trembling voice and asked that if they were going to discard him anyway, why had they taken him in at all? Radric bent down and coldly told him to stop deceiving himself. He had never needed him from the beginning. He roughly grabbed Aster's hair, yanking his head up to force him to meet his contemptuous gaze, then leaned closer to reveal the terrible truth. What he had truly needed was the power of the 7 wings sleeping within Aster's body. Aster's eyes widened in shock as he repeated in disbelief, 7 wings. Radric's cruel smile deepened as he added coldly that his mother had been very useful. He boasted shamelessly that she had borne him only as the seed he required for his own benefit. The last thing as remembered was himself screaming desperately, demanding answers from Radric as cold blades pierced through his body. His consciousness slowly faded, leaving only a bone-chilling cold as his hand sank into the snow. In that final moment, he wondered in despair if this was truly the end of his fate. If so, what meaning had his entire life held? Suddenly, a pale and gentle warmth enveloped him, and for a fleeting second he thought he had reached the afterlife until he realized it was snow. He felt someone holding him in their arms, a foreign warmth that was strangely tender. His eyes flew open wide. No, this was not a dream. It was reality. Confused, he wondered where he was as he lay beneath falling snow. And then horror struck when he noticed the smallness of his body. Staring at his tiny hands, he questioned whether they were truly his. They were not merely similar, they were the hands of a newborn child, and he was being cradled in someone's arms. He looked at the woman holding him and saw that she appeared to have just breathed her last, wondering if she was already dead. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice echoed in his mind, commanding him to seek her. In a vision, he saw knights galloping through the snowstorm, declaring that she could not have gone far. One of them shouted that by order of Duke Radric, They must recover the child she had taken at any cost. The vision vanished, leaving us stunned and unable to comprehend what had just happened. He remained there, overwhelmed as the snow continued to fall. He froze when he remembered the name that had been spoken, Duke Radric. Horror dawned on him as he realized that the ones searching for the newborn were, in truth, searching for him. The memory of being found on a night of raging snowstorm resurfaced, and a wild suspicion took root in his mind. Had he returned to the past? He tried to push the thought away when strange flashes of light flickered before his eyes, interrupting his reflection. Though he still could not fully believe it, he chose to set aside the question for now and focus on the immediate danger. One thing was certain: if he remained there, he would once again fall into the hands of the cruel Duke. With the will of a seasoned warrior, he forced his fragile newborn body to crawl out of the cold arms of the woman who had already lost her warmth. Suddenly, a surge of golden energy burst from within him, driving his desperate resolve to flee as far as possible. The heat from his tiny hands melted the thick snow wherever he touched it. Yet the body of a newborn soon reached its limit. He collapsed into the snow, feeling his breathing grow heavier and more strained. Amid the biting cold, his limbs burned as if consumed by fire. A long trail of melted water marked his path across the white ground, but he could barely drag himself any farther. Even so, his eyes shone with unyielding determination. No matter what, he swore he would survive. The image of his ruthless father turning his back on him resurfaced, planning a vow of vengeance deep in his heart. Clenching his teeth, pouring every ounce of hatred into his glowing hands, he whispered to himself, "Radric, I swear." With the last of his strength, the tiny newborn crawled with astonishing persistence, carving a long mark across the snow until, completely exhausted, he collapsed at the feet of a figure who had just appeared. A little girl pointed excitedly at the motionless child and called out to her father in delight. The man known as Viscount Fred could not hide his shock at the sight before him. Gently, he picked up the baby, wondering how such a child could possibly have ended up in a place like this. Feeling the safety and warmth of the man's embrace, the child drifted into sleep. Viscount Fred stared in astonishment at the strange newborn in his arms. His eyes traced the long trail left behind in the snow, and he could scarcely believe that a baby could have traveled such a distance alone. Looking down at the sleeping child, he could not help but wonder about the boy's true identity. When he awoke again, he found himself in a warm room, far removed from the raging storm outside. Still drowsy, he questioned where he was, and suddenly an illusion appeared before him, a boy with hair as red as fire, reaching out his hand as if trying to take him away. Just as abruptly, a gentle pinch on his cheek pulled him out of the vision. Four charming little girls surrounded him. One of them excitedly announced to the eldest that the baby had awakened, while the older sister scolded the others not to ruin the baby's pretty nose. The veteran warrior, now trapped in the helpless body of an infant, could do nothing as he found himself surrounded and handled by four lively girls. Unable to understand what was happening, he struggled helplessly in their midst. Fortunately, the eldest sister, a girl with platinum hair, rescued him from the others' clutches. Even so, he curled up in her lap with suspicion in his eyes. Suddenly, with the will of an adult trapped inside, he tried to stand and free himself from the girl's arms, but his fragile newborn body betrayed him at once, and he fell face first onto the floor, shocking everyone in the room. One of the girls cried out in alarm, unable to comprehend what on earth was going on. Startled and frustrated, as began crawling frantically, not understanding why the girls were chasing after him while shouting for him to stop. The comical pursuit ended only when his tiny body could no longer endure the effort, and he was finally caught. Viscount Fred managed to scoop him up just in time and remarked in astonishment that he truly was a strange child, falling from the sky like that. As his eyes widened, he froze the moment he recognized the man holding him. This was Viscount Fred, the brother of Duke Radric. Shocked, he looked around at his surroundings. Could this place be another residence of the Elmine family? Igra Elmine, lord of the Viscount's house and head of a lesser branch of the Elmine family, had once stood alongside his brother Radric. They were known as the Twin Wings, the two right hands entrusted with protecting the royal family. Yet in the memories as carried from his previous life, Viscount Ifrit had died tragically during a civil war, bringing about the downfall of his entire house. Seeing the Viscount alive and standing before him, as could finally be certain he truly had returned to the past. Even so, he could not help but clutch his head at the bitter irony. In trying to escape the Duke's household, he had fallen straight into the hands of his own brother. Meanwhile, the Viscountess, who now held him gently, speculated that perhaps the child's magic had gone out of control and caused him to fly. Convinced that he was no ordinary baby, she looked at him with tender eyes and a warm smile so different from the cruelty he remembered. She hugged him softly, comforting him and telling him that he must have been very frightened, but that everything would be all right now. For the first time in both of his lives, has felt the warmth of a mother's embrace. It left him stunned and speechless. From a short distance away, Viscount Fred smiled in quiet satisfaction as he watched the scene. He stepped closer and declared that this child harbored extraordinary power, and that the mark on his body was the clearest proof. As the Viscount lifted the baby's sleeve before a mirror, a bright red mark came into view. The Viscountess gasped in horror. "Is this the 7 wings?" she whispered, as himself went rigid, unable to understand why the mark of the 7 wings had appeared on his body. At that very moment, fragments of dreadful memories from his previous life surged back like crashing waves. He awoke fully to the truth. Radrick's words echoed. In his mind, what he had needed was the power of the 7 wings hidden within his body. From the very beginning, he had never intended to raise him as a son. He had taken him in for one purpose only, to steal the 7 wings. And yet he had dared to call him wingless, after stripping him of his, after having his own wings torn away in his previous life. Indignation erupted in Aster's heart like a blazing fire. Back in the present, noticing the sudden change in his expression, the Viscountess spoke with concern and then turned to her husband to ask what he intended to do with the child. Hearing this, as felt inwardly that the situation was truly dangerous. He could not allow this power to fall into the hands of the Elmine family again. He needed it for himself, needed it to take revenge on that man. Then, without hesitation, Viscount Fred made a decision. He declared that he would adopt the child, as lifted his gaze in shock, stunned by such an unexpected and unbelievable statement. The Viscount slowly extended his hand, and there was not the slightest trace of malice in his eyes. He gently patted the boy's head and said that this child was still a little bird who could not yet fly on his own, and that he would raise him until the day he could spread his wings and soar freely. Something complex flickered in Aster's glassy eyes and quietly faded. This kind of kindness, it was something he had never experienced before. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the room. One of the Viscount's daughters, who had been secretly eavesdropping outside the door, had fallen over. The Viscount turned sharply and sternly, asked if 2 of his daughters had been listening in, but it turned out not to be 2, it was all 4 sisters, who had been stacked in a clumsy pile after collapsing on top of one another. The eldest daughter stood up awkwardly, scratching her head and explaining that they had simply been too worried about the baby. Amid this warm family atmosphere, a red-haired girl looked curiously at her mother. Pointing at the newborn in her arms, she asked excitedly what his name would be. The Viscountess smiled gently, gazing tenderly at the child, lifting him slightly under the soft glow of the moonlight. She gave him the name Aster, saying that it meant a new star had been born into their family. Time passed swiftly. 10 years later, within a splendid mansion, Viscount Fred, now visibly older, arrived, and was greeted by a soldier's respectful bow. Behind him, a nimble young attendant stepped forward to open the door of a luxurious carriage. It was Aster. The once helpless infant had grown into a handsome and elegant young man as he descended from the vehicle. Turning politely, he extended his hand to help a red-haired girl step down, gently reminding Miss Alphen to be careful. The young lady smiled brightly and thanked Aster, and for a brief moment, her mischievous expression from childhood resurfaced in his memory. Aster watched his sister Alphen's back with quiet affection. In his gaze shone maturity and confidence. Together, they walked toward the venue of an important event. They were heading to the Sword Ballland annual gathering hosted by the Ducal House of Elmine for noble knight families. On the surface, it was an occasion meant to strengthen ties among the nobility, but in truth it was also a ruthless arena of rivalry between houses. Each family would present the strength of their young swordsmen, who carried the honor of their entire lineage upon their shoulders. The moment Aster and Alphen entered the Grand Hall, every gaze turned toward them. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Murmurs and mocking comments began to rise. Voices laced with subtle disdain as they spoke of the house of the Viscount had come only to humiliate itself, having adopted a brat of unknown origin instead of producing a proper heir. Among the crowd, hostile and malicious glances questioned just how far the Viscount's family intended to tarnish the reputation of the Elmine name. Aster stood still, his gaze fixed on the imposing castle before him, lost in thought. Noticing his silence, Alphen squeezed his hand anxiously and told him not to pay attention to those cruel whispers. She clenched her teeth and said firmly that in a place like this, whoever showed weakness would be crushed first. Aster remained quiet. Calmly, he surveyed the hostility surrounding them without the slightest change in expression. Behind him, Viscount Fred spoke in a low, steady voice, explaining that this was the current standing of their house. Standing before the majestic ducal castle, he said he wanted Aster to see this harsh reality with his own eyes. Then he turned toward his son and asked whether he felt disappointed. Aster turned slightly. A confident and faintly defiant smile curved his lips as he replied, "Not at all, father. This coldness suits me perfectly." Hearing his son's firm answer, Viscount Fred burst into proud laughter, clearly at ease. Suddenly, painful memories from Aster's previous life flooded back himself as the shame of House Elmine. Defeated in humiliation, this very place had been the stage of his worst social disgrace, a hall filled with bitter memories. But now, having regained the 7 wings, everything was different. A flame of determination burned in his golden eyes, signaling that revenge was about to begin. Standing beside his father and his sister Alphen, Aster lifted his gaze toward the towering ducal castle, a structure heavy with the weight of his past. From above, the 2 half-brothers of his former life looked down at him with arrogance and contempt, despite their scrutinizing stares. Aster's expression remained perfectly composed. Beneath his fringe lay an extraordinary calm. Now was the time to step forward with dignity and face everything. Confidence gleamed in Aster's eyes as he thought silently to himself. Let's make a spectacular entrance. Inside the grand hall, an intense fencing competition was unfolding at the central stage, capturing the full attention of the gathered nobles. In an era where knights reigned supreme, they were expected to embody both overwhelming power and noble grandeur. Power was demonstrated through masterful swordsmanship, while grandeur stemmed from the fame and standing of one's house. At the center of the hall, two young swordsmen clashed in a fierce duel, their movements brimming with explosive energy. They charged across the arena toward one another, closing the distance in an instant for a decisive collision. What followed was the very embodiment of strength and splendor, the manifestation of magical energy. With a single precise strike, one combatant shattered his opponent's sword into pieces. The defeated youth's face froze in disbelief just before he collapsed. The victor rose proudly, revealing the absolute symbol of his family's lineage, the wing emblem. On the back of his hand, the emblem of two wings glowed with a bluish light, irrefutable proof of his power. From the balcony above, Aster watched the scene in silence, his gaze steady and unreadable. Perfect composure, thinking to himself that this place was just as intimidating as it had always been. No wonder his other sisters, Fren and Free, had firmly refused to come to such a hostile environment, ignoring the mocking stares that he recognized all too well from his past life. Aster's resolve hardened like steel. A bitter memory continued to haunt him, the image of his humiliating defeat in this very hall. Noticing that his gaze had drifted far away, Alfin called his name with genuine concern. She gently asked if he was nervous, since after all, this was his first sword ball. Aster, however, smiled with unusual confidence and replied that he was not nervous at all. If anything, he felt nostalgic. His strange answer left Alfin completely confused, unable to understand what he meant. At that moment, Viscount Fred excused himself, saying he needed to attend a conference, and entrusted Aster with taking care of Alfin. Indignant, Alfin protested, reminding her father that she was 1 year older. Aster teased her lightly, saying she was far too clumsy. The Viscount placed a hand on Aster's shoulder and advised him to take advantage of the opportunity to make connections, since there were many young nobles his age present. Then, lowering his voice, he warned him seriously not to let anyone discover the truth about the Seven Wings. As the Viscount walked away, Aster remained deep in thought, weighing his adoptive father's warning. Yet the looks directed at him from every corner of the hall were filled with barely concealed hostility. He thought wryly that in such an openly unfriendly atmosphere, forming connections as his father suggested would be nearly impossible. But instead of shrinking back, a cold determination settled into his golden eyes. When Alfin saw him walking forward with firm steps, she asked anxiously where he was going. Without even turning to look at her, he answered calmly, to make friends. With steady strides, Aster descended the grand staircase and headed straight toward a group of young nobles chatting on a sofa, the red-haired youth leading. The group looked at him with disdain and demanded to know who he was. Aster bowed slightly, wearing a confident smile, and said it was a pleasure to meet him. Brother Darius. He then introduced himself formally as Aster Elmine, declaring that he was his younger brother. Darius stared at him in astonishment. Casually, Aster added that he had seen him from outside and thought he would stop by to greet him. Another young man, Leo, leaned toward Darius and explained that this was the adopted boy the Viscount's house had taken in. Darius burst into manic laughter, now understanding why this brat had the audacity to call himself an Elmine. At that instant, memories of his past death flooded Aster's mind. He recognized them clearly: Darius and Gryo, the two heirs of House Elmine, the very ones who had killed him. In his previous life, they had cast long shadows over his heart, seeming terrifying beyond measure. But now, as he looked at them under the bright lights of the hall, they appeared to be nothing more than a group of children playing at power. Sensing the tension, Alfin quickly grabbed Aster by the arm and called his name in concern. She tried to pull him away, insisting that he had already greeted them, and it was time to return. But Darius's mocking voice stopped her, addressing her with an unwanted familiarity. With a sneer, he asked whether she wasn't hiding behind her father again today, and then arrogantly ordered them to come closer and entertain him, declaring it an order from the main house. Alfin froze, her back stiff as she stood facing away from them. Her body trembled with tension, her eyes burning with fury at the humiliating command. She flatly refused, stating firmly that there was no master-servant relationship between the main house and their branch family. Just as she was about to step forward and act, Aster swiftly caught her wrist, stopping her from making a reckless move. Holding her firmly, he said calmly that he had not finished speaking yet. His composed profile stood in sharp contrast to the charged atmosphere, concealing his true intentions beneath a mask of serenity. Seeing this, Darius's lips twisted into a sadistic grin as he decided to pour more oil onto the fire. He began mocking her openly, reminding everyone that her father, though a knight, had failed to protect the king, and that as punishment, his own younger brother had cut off his arm. Each word struck Alfin like a lash, forcing her to lower her head in pain and humiliation. Darius continued his cruel speech, saying how grateful he was that he did not carry the blood of such a loser in his veins. Unable to endure it any longer, Alfin erupted in fury, demanding that he retract his words. With an angry shout, she declared that she would not allow him to insult her father, and lunged forward, landing a powerful punch squarely against Darius's jaw. Yet even as she lowered her head, Darius continued his verbal assault, mocking that in her family only, useless daughters were born girls who could not inherit a title and that her father must surely be disappointed. With a vicious smile, he lifted his wine glass and coldly reminded her that this was not a dance floor. Then he flung the wine at her, staining her dress, and cruelly advised her to wear rags next time so she would not have to worry about getting soaked. At that very moment, Aster stepped forward. On his way here, he had been wondering to himself whether, upon seeing their faces again, he would feel nothing at all, no anger, no resentment. With a smooth and sudden motion, he snatched a bottle of wine from a startled noble nearby. But when he saw his sister standing there, humiliated, her eyes brimming with tears, her cheek bruised and bleeding, he felt a strange relief. So he could still feel anger. Calmly, he called out Darius's name and tossed the wine bottle into the air with a provocative flick of his wrist. Just as the bottle was about to smash against Darius's head, it halted midair, suspended by an invisible force. Aster looked at him with open contempt and declared that they were still the same pieces of trash as ever. With a subtle movement of his hand, the suspended bottle turned into a weapon ready to strike. In the next instant, it shattered, drenching the utterly stunned Darius in red wine from head to toe. Aster then stood upright with chilling composure over the fallen bodies of the nobles, his sword dripping with blood, while Griot screamed his brother's name in desperation, wiping a drop of liquid from his lip. Aster remarked casually that it was only grape juice. With a twisted, contemptuous smile, he added that it was the perfect drink for noble babies like them. They did not believe him. A memory from 3 years ago suddenly crashed into his mind, an explosion of golden energy, and his father's voice shouting at him to control it. Amid the chaos, one sister held another unconscious in her arms, crying through tears and asking if he was trying to kill them, begging him to hold on. Alphen, his eldest sister, had pleaded in terror for him to control himself as spirals of dark and golden power coiled around him. He remembered the power of the 7 wings unleashing a force so dangerous that even he barely understood it. The image of his father, Deskin freed, appeared in his thoughts, his face lined with worry as he questioned whether Aster could ever master such power. Aster remembered his own struggle, the overwhelming energy tearing through his body, and his father's voice wondering if either of them could endure it. Meanwhile, an attendant burst into the conference hall shouting that something terrible had happened. Viscount Fred, interrupted, demanded sternly what could be so urgent in the middle of such an important meeting. The attendant reported in panic that the children of the main house and the Elmine branch family were engaged in a duel. The Viscount and his brother, Duke Aderic, exchanged a tense glance. Instantly, the Viscount leapt to his feet and rushed from the hall, his cape billowing behind him. When he reached the balcony, he found a distressed Alphen running toward him, crying out, "Father." He urgently asked what had happened. A broad man with a shark-like smile pointed toward the arena below, commenting with excitement that a fight between the great Elmine brothers was underway, something not seen every day. The Viscount and Alphen leaned over to see Aster facing Darius alone. The man added that depending on how this ended, the consequences could be enormous, a thought that visibly unsettled the surrounding nobles. With a sinister grin, the red-eyed man predicted that this dance of swords was about to turn ugly. In the arena, Darius, enraged, unleashed his power, shouting that some fool had dared to provoke the Duke's house. He called Aster nothing more than a stray dog who did not understand the difference in power between them. The emblem of 4 wings on his hand glowed with blue light, and the crowd murmured in awe that, as expected, the Duke's son stood on an entirely different level, pressing the tip of his sword close to Aster's face. Darius smirked and demanded that he show his own wing emblem, or was he too ashamed to reveal it after seeing Darius's? But Aster replied with unsettling calm that Darius was right, boasting about a mere pattern was indeed embarrassing. With a faint half-smile playing on his lips, he stood unmoved before him. With a faint smile, Aster added that he could never do something so vulgar. A vein throbbed violently on Darius's forehead, his face flushing red as humiliation burned through him at Aster's unexpected insolence. Aster calmly set his terms. If he won, Darius would apologize to his sister. Darius accepted at once, countering that if he won, Aster would become his dog, shouting that he would work him to the bone. Without another word, Darius lunged forward with scything speed. Their swords collided in a shower of golden sparks, the ringing clash echoing through the arena and marking the beginning of a duel that was clearly more than a mere display. Aster shifted into a firm combat stance, his sword steady in his grip as an aura of dust and swirling wind gathered around him. His golden eyes sharpened with focus, his hand tightening around the hilt in preparation for the coming assault. Darius, wearing a smile of superiority, unleashed his own energy and declared that this was the power of someone who actually possessed an emblem. With a fierce shout, he launched a barrage of swift, crushing slashes that tore through the air, each strike carving a gust of cutting wind in its wake. From the balcony, Alphen screamed Aster's name, her face pale with terror at the ferocity of the attack. The broad man beside her merely smirked and remarked that young Master Darius's swordsmanship was still immature. Even so, Darius's overwhelming magic more than compensated for any technical flaws. A violent surge of power erupted from him, proving the advantage of those who bore winged emblems. In his arrogance, Darius thought that if one wing contained the magic of a candle, then his four wings were a true explosion. Flames burst outward in a relentless rain of blazing strikes. He mocked Aster as he pressed him back, asking what had become of the boldness he had shown earlier. Unshaken by the onslaught, Aster met the storm of attacks with a steel-eyed calm, blocking each strike with precise movements. Darius sneered, taunting him. Did he not want to force an apology after all? Or had it all been empty words? With a furious roar, Darius demanded that Aster show his power and poured every ounce of energy into a final, devastating blow. From the stands, a mustached noble smiled smugly and declared the match decided. But Aster answered by releasing his own aura. His sword shone with a pure, white radiance. The two forces collided in a massive explosion of red and gold energy, a breathtaking spectacle of raw magic and brute strength. Darius's face twisted into disbelief, unable to comprehend how his ultimate strike had been stopped. Aster offered him a half-smile and said simply that he talked too much. With a smooth, elegant motion, he knocked Darius's blade aside and delivered a spinning kick that sent him flying across the arena. Aster landed lightly, his body now wrapped in tendrils of golden energy, displaying a level of control Darius could never hope to match. For 10 long years in the Viscount's household, he had trained to master his magic, patiently waiting for the day he could take his revenge. That day had finally come. With an upward slash, Aster unleashed a brilliant surge of power that split the air itself. Golden light roaring skyward as the arena trembled beneath the force of his strike. A golden blaze of power erupted from Aster's blade. The force of the impact hurled Darius backward. Completely unable to withstand the charge, he crashed down awkwardly, his knees striking the ground with a sickening crack as he struggled to rise. From a distance, his brother Gria watched in disbelief, stammering that Darius was being pushed back, utterly overwhelmed by the green and gold energy wrapping around him. Darius's face twisted in shock, his mind barely able to grasp what was happening. He shouted in outrage that he had for wings. Aster remained unmoved, his expression cold and calculating, as golden energy danced along the edge of his sword. With one swift, decisive motion, he condensed his power into a single point. The noble spectators gasped in shock. One whispered aloud whether Aster could truly win this, while another pointed out that Darius was being completely dominated. Then a final explosion of golden energy burst from Aster's blade, sealing the duel's outcome. Murmurs of astonishment rippled through the crowd. The Elmine family still possessed someone with such power among them, but Aster's golden aura intensified further. Dark tendrils began to seep from his body as his power surged to a terrifying degree. From the balcony, Deskin Halford frowned deeply, muttering that this was bad. Darius's face contorted in pain, and, fury as the crushing pressure of Aster's power bore down on him. A traumatic memory from his past life struck him without warning, the image of one of his brothers severing his arm with a deranged smile. The mad laughter echoed in his ears, a reminder of the cruelty he had endured. Back in the present, dark and golden energy exploded outward from Aster, his face shadowed by uncontrollable rage. Trapped within the vortex of power, Darius screamed curses as he desperately tried to resist the overwhelming force. From above, Alphen cried out in panic, begging Aster to stop. But it was too late. The power of the 7 wings fully unleashed, detonating in a blinding explosion that carved a massive crater into the center of the arena. When the dust finally settled, the broad man stood with his arms crossed, his expression grave. Aster's sword was embedded in the ground mere inches from Darius's terrified face. It had stopped just in time. Seated on the ground, utterly defeated, Darius listened as Aster calmly returned his own cruel words. With an icy gaze, Aster advised him that next time he should wear rags so he would not have to worry about getting wet. Cousin. Aster turned away, sheathing his sword with a quiet confidence. He declared to himself that he was no longer the wingless failure everyone once knew. From the balcony, Alphen watched him with a mixture of relief and awe, her heart still pounding. Aster allowed himself a faint smile, knowing that his sister was safe for now. That was enough to steady his mind. Suddenly, his golden eye flickered with a flash of red. He sensed a new presence. A figure wrapped in dark crimson energy descended from the ceiling and landed heavily in the center of the hall. Aster's gaze sharpened at once, recognizing the ominous figure who had made such a dramatic entrance. At the top of the grand staircase stood an imposing man, the Duke Radric. His presence filled the hall with suffocating tension. One word slipped from Aster's lips, heavy with hatred and resolve. Radric. The spectators were still murmuring in disbelief, unable to comprehend that the Viscount's youngest son had just defeated the third son of the main house. But the situation had turned grave. After such public humiliation, there was no way the main house would remain idle. The towering figure of Duke Rarlemagne, the 8th leader of the main house, descended the stairs slowly. Darius, still on the ground, looked up at him with a mixture of fear and relief, as though his father's arrival meant salvation. Aster did not move. His eyes locked onto the man who embodied all his pain and his thirst for revenge. The Duke's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene. Aster felt a suffocating aura of power and hostility emanating from him, the same man who had betrayed, and killed him in his previous life. Despite the crushing pressure in the hall, Darius began to crawl forward, his body trembling from humiliation. He clutched at his father's leg, pointing at Aster with a face twisted by hatred. He called him a mangy dog who dared challenge the main house, and begged his father to use his power to put him in his place. Instead of help, Roderick's hand slammed down onto the ground directly over his son's. A scream of agony tore from Darius's throat as his bones cracked. Under the immense pressure, his hand crushed beneath his father's palm. The young nobles stared in horror and confusion, unable to understand the Duke's brutality. Grio's face drained of color as he witnessed the cruelty of his own father. Roderick looked down at his defeated son with utter contempt and asked why he was smiling like an idiot after dragging the family's name through the mud. From the balcony, Deskin Hafred shouted, pleading with Roderick to stop. But the Duke ignored him coldly. He declared that someone who could not even avenge himself had no right to wield a sword, raising his hand as if to deliver the finishing blow. The grand hall fell into tense silence, the air thick with anticipation. On the ground, Darius could only tremble, his face a mixture of humiliation and terror. Yet the fiercest fury burned in Duke Roderick's crimson eyes as they shifted to the one who had just arrived at the center of it all. He pointed his sword directly at Aster and demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Aster did not flinch. Calmly, he answered that his cousin had not yet apologized to his sister. Sister, Aster finished calmly. Then, with astonishing boldness, he looked at his uncle and asked whether the punishment could be reserved until after the apology was given. Roderick, wrapped in a menacing purple aura, let out a mocking laugh. He asked if being a stray orphan, taken in by a Freeded, had made him believe he was truly part of the Elmine family. Aster did not waver. He declared firmly that he was the Viscount's son, and that his father had taught him thoroughly about the pride of a knight and the weight of inheriting a house's name even without sharing its blood. The Duke fell silent for a moment, his expression hardening as he processed the boy's defiant words. Then, flames erupted around him as he accused Aster of unnecessarily tarnishing the reputation of the main house, the very pride that stood at the peak of its 12,000 knights. From the balcony, the broad man remarked that they should understand that well, while a young man with light blue hair added with a faint smile that this could hardly be dismissed as a mere children's quarrel. Deskin Hafri's voice rang out gravely, reminding them that his father had once offered an arm as the price for disloyalty. Now the edge of Duke Roderick's sword pressed coldly against Aster's throat. He demanded to know what Aster would offer in exchange. With all due respect, Aster began evenly, explaining that this had not been a sibling scuffle, but a legitimate duel, and that he had simply answered insults against his house with his blade. The Duke's eyes burned with silent fury at the young boy's bold yet logical response. Aster met his gaze without hesitation, repeating the Duke's own harsh words that one who cannot avenge himself has no right to wield a sword, and declared that he had no intention of yielding even a single finger. From above, Alphen trembled as she watched, while the broad man beside her gently patted her head in an attempt to calm her. The blue-haired youth chuckled under his breath in disbelief, remarking that Aster was only 10 years old. This had to be some kind of joke. Roderick remained silent for a long moment, his red eye glowing with dangerous intensity. At last, he drew his own sword and said simply that he understood. In a cold, commanding tone, he ordered Aster to draw his blade. Aster hesitated for a fraction of a second, not expecting the Duke himself to intervene. Before he could fully react, the ground beneath him shattered and an invisible force hurled him into the air. The tip of the Duke's sword slammed into the ground where Aster had stood a heartbeat earlier, unleashing a devastating shockwave. Alphen choked back a scream, her eyes wide with terror at the overwhelming power on display. Deskin Hafri shouted his brother's name, his face twisted with rage at what he saw as a cowardly strike. Leaping from the balcony, he placed himself between the Duke and Aster, his own sword sweeping in a brilliant arc of blue light. The blades of the two brothers collided in an eruption of sparks and force. A duel between the leaders of the two houses had begun at last. The shockwaves from their clash thundered through the great hall, making clear the immense gulf in power. The Viscount landed beside Aster and urgently asked if he was all right. In front of them, a massive pillar of stone rose from the ground, blocking the Duke's path. The Viscount's face filled with surprise and concern at the defensive technique. Aster pushed himself to his feet with difficulty. His body was bruised, blood trailing down from his forehead, but his spirit remained unbroken. His eyes burned brighter than before, a fierce blend of pain, fury, and unshakable resolve. Duke Aderic watched the scene unfold with a faint, superior smile, seemingly satisfied with how events had turned. Without another word, he turned and began walking back toward the stairs, abandoning the confrontation. With an agile leap, he landed on the balcony beside his defeated son, leaving behind a hall scarred by destruction. The Viscount watched him go, then placed a protective hand on Aster's shoulder. Standing firmly at his side amid the lingering tremors of power, the Viscount stood shaken, holding the injured Aster in his arms and calling his name with a voice thick with worry. Despite the blood and bruises, Aster managed a satisfied smile and assured his father that he had properly upheld his promise and everything else that mattered. Relief and pride blended in the Viscount's expression as he told his son he had been magnificent. Meanwhile, Duke Radric withdrew with his defeated son, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. The broad man approached the Duke with a faint smile, remarking that his reaction had been rather childish. Radric paused long enough to explain coldly to his humiliated son that, if he had allowed the boy to say whatever he pleased, the reputation of the main house would have been completely ruined. What he had done, he claimed, was a reasonable compromise. Away from the confrontation, nobles murmured in amazement. A promising newcomer had boldly challenged the great Duke Radric himself and survived, emerging as a rising star. The mustached noble admitted that while the thought of the Elmine family dividing made him uneasy, the boy could not have asked for a better social debut. In the shadows, Duke Aderic watched with a somber gaze, aware that an age of upheaval was drawing near, a storm powerful enough to split the world itself. Back with his family, Aster was met with a worried embrace from Alphen, while his father supported him proudly. Blood stained his face, but a victorious smile lingered there. Aster was left speechless. The scene shifted to the training arena of the Viscount House of Elmhine. Several knights stood watch as a training session unfolded. Two of them sparred with wooden swords. With an easy smile, the knight praised his master's performance, calling it splendid. The one he praised was Aster. The surrounding knights murmured among themselves, remarking that Aster's swordsmanship was terrifying for someone of his age. They noted that his training had grown even more intense since the sword dance assembly. One knight recalled how Aster had defeated the third son of Elmhine family, and the group could not hide their satisfaction. The main family had looked down on the Viscount house for years, and seeing one of their own stand tall against them felt deeply refreshing. As Aster continued defeating opponent after opponent, his thoughts drifted inward. At the sword dance assembly, he had shown enough power and presence to silence those who called his family a disgrace to House Elmhine. Yet he knew the real hurdle still lay ahead, the Elmhine main house. He wished he could have tested himself further on that stage against more opponents. Even now he understood that at his current level, he stood no chance of defeating Roderick Elmhine. To Aster, a winged crest was nothing more than an indicator of magical potential. Inborn magic was a useless treasure if one could not fully master it, and even now he could not draw out the full power of the 7 wings. If only he did not have to fear losing control going berserk, he could truly test the limits of that power. With a final exchange, Aster defeated the last knight standing. Several knights lay on the ground. Aster's gaze was sharp and determined, as he asked calmly if anyone else wished to step forward. Before anyone could answer, a familiar voice interrupted. Alphen appeared, remarking that he was pushing himself to hard again. She asked whether he even knew what rest was and told him that their father was calling for him. Aster agreed at once and said he would go see their father. As he walked, he noticed his sister's outfit and commented on it. Alphen turned confused, not understanding what he meant at first. Aster explained that it was rare to see her wearing that outfit since she used to dislike it for not being cute. She replied that balance was important. Watching Aster train had made her realize she could not remain the same forever either. Her words caught Aster off guard, leaving him momentarily speechless, especially when she raised her training sword toward him with a confident smile. She said that when he returned, they would spend a lot of time together. With a grin, Aster accepted her challenge and asked her politely to go easy on him. Sometime later, Aster arrived at his father's office. When he entered, Viscount Ifrita told him to take a seat. Aster complied, sitting across from his father with a serious expression. Ifrit remarked that 10 years had passed since they had welcomed Aster into the family. He admitted that he had once considered waiting until Aster was older, but decided it was time to move things forward. He placed a small case on the desk. Inside lay a ring. Ifrit revealed that the ring was proof of succession, the symbol of the next head of the Viscount house. He then declared that he wanted Aster to be his successor. Aster froze in shock. Directly and without hesitation, the Viscount told him that he wanted him to inherit the house. The young boy sat stunned as his father explained that, as Aster already knew, the branch of the family stood in a delicate position. Despite everything, they still bore the Elmine name. As lords of their territory, they had much to protect. With the weight of their lineage pressing upon him, the Viscount stated that the position of the next head of the house could not remain vacant forever. Aster's first concern, however, was his sisters. He asked whether they would agree with such a decision. The Viscount informed him that his older sisters, currently studying at the Knights Academy, would return in 3 days, and he intended to tell everyone then. Aster immediately thought of Marfa and Kudo, powerful, imposing figures in their own right. With a wry smile, he thought that they would not be pleased at all. In particular, Kudo would be furious. His father sighed and explained that Kudo disliked him simply because he had been born male and because he had been blessed with the 7 wings. Hearing that, Aster's expression hardened. With unshakable determination, he declared that he could not accept the proposal. Turning his back slightly, he confessed that he could not even fully control his own magic. He called himself an immature fool who had nearly killed his own sister. In the vast, silent study, He stated that someone like him did not have the confidence to persuade an angry sister, let alone carry the burden of leadership. He refused the honor. The Viscount listened quietly, a faint smile forming on his lips. At last, he broke the silence and admitted that he often wondered whether Aster was truly a child at all. Ignoring the refusal for the moment, he opened a long wooden box. He said he had originally planned to give Aster the ring as a reward for the sword dance, but perhaps this would make him happier instead. When Aster saw what lay inside, his eyes widened in disbelief. He asked in astonishment what it was. The Viscount revealed that it was the magic sword, Grandma blade capable of controlling the power of the 7 wings, the devouring magic sword. Later, in a secluded forest clearing, the Viscount declared that the place would suffice. Aster, puzzled, asked why they had come so far just to test the sword. The Viscount simply replied that it was a precaution. With an ironic smile, he remarked that Aster had a habit of breaking things, recalling the many times his uncontrollable power had caused destruction. He presented Graham properly, explaining that it was a legendary blade passed down only to the firstborn of the Elmine family. He himself had retrieved it from the main house especially for Aster. With a sharp motion, he drew it from its sheath. Aster stared in utter confusion. Was that truly a sword? As he could plainly see, it had no blade. The Viscount smiled and explained that when magic was channeled into it, a crimson, ethereal blade would emerge from the hilt. As he demonstrated, a red spectral edge burst forth, leaving Aster speechless. The sword, he said, completed itself with the wielder's magic, a true blade of power. With a single swing, the Viscount unleashed a massive shockwave that carved a wide path through the forest. Trees split apart as a vortex of wind and debris roared outward, showcasing the weapon's overwhelming might. However, he warned that with mediocre magical power, the sword would drain its wielder dry. It was a devouring blade in every sense. Holding the glowing crimson hilt out to him, the Viscount asked if Aster would try. Without hesitation, Aster grasped it, his hands closing over his father's in a symbolic gesture. The moment his fingers touched the hilt, his own magic arc and golden tendrils intertwined surged forward to meet it. Energy exploded around him in a violent, uncontrollable storm. He felt his magic pour into the sword on its own, an overwhelming sensation that stole his breath. Back at the training grounds, a beam of red light shot skyward, piercing the heavens and leaving everyone staring in shock. One knight gasped and wondered if a comet had fallen, but his companion shouted that it was the opposite. Something had flown up into the sky. Watching from afar, Alphen heard the commotion. Though the description was vague, she recognized the energy instantly. There was no doubt in her mind. It was Aster. In the forest, Aster sank down onto the ground, utterly exhausted yet wearing a smile of pure amazement. He admitted breathlessly that the sword was truly extraordinary. The Viscount looked at his son with a mixture of awe and stern seriousness, telling him that what was truly remarkable was not the blade itself, but the incredible power that resided within him. In a grave voice, he revealed that in the entire vast history of the Elmane family, not a single person had ever possessed a 7-winged emblem. As they moved deeper into the forest, he assured Aster that if he could master that power, he would become a swordsman far superior to 6-winged warriors like himself and even Radric. The image of Radric flashed through Aster's mind, and the thought of surpassing him ignited a blazing fire of determination and vengeance in his golden eyes. However, his father warned him solemnly that such immense power would always breed conflict. As Aster tightened his grip around the hilt of Gran, the Viscount explained that if people discovered he possessed 7 wings, his emblem shining on his back, like a beacon, many would envy him, while others would hate him, like ghostly hands trying to drag him into darkness. Some would attempt to manipulate him through schemes and intrigue, while others, seeing him as a threat, would not hesitate to eliminate him. Reaching out his hand in a gesture of support, the Viscount urged him to master his power so that when the decisive moment arrived, he would not be left regretting his own helplessness. With firm conviction, he encouraged his adoptive son to grow stronger. Aster took his father's hand, his heart overflowing with gratitude, and silently vowed that he would never again live a miserable life like he had in the past. Looking straight into his father's eyes, he thanked him sincerely and swore that he would master the 7 wings no matter the cost. 3 days later, the Viscount and his wife waited in the Grand Hall, ready to welcome home their 2 daughters who were returning. 2 young women descended the staircase, one with short red hair and a fierce expression, the other with long white hair and a gentle smile. The red-haired girl proudly announced that Kadriaka had returned. After clearing her throat to regain her composure, she spread her arms wide with a radiant grin, inviting her beloved little sisters to come and embrace her. Instead, the 2 younger girls ran straight to the white-haired sister, Marfa, joyfully welcoming her home. Left standing alone in the middle of the hall, Kudo blinked in confusion, wondering why no one was hugging her. The little girls explained, as they cuddled close to Marfa, that it was because Sister Kudo always messed up their hair. Crossing her arms with an offended expression, Kudo flatly denied the accusation, declaring that she had perfectly mastered the etiquette of a knight and would never behave in such an improper manner. Yet her serious facade crumbled the moment she saw her sister, Alphen. With a joyful shout, she lunged forward and wrapped her in a crushing embrace. nearly suffocating her, asking loudly whether she had been a good girl in her absence. Alphonse struggled desperately to free herself from the overwhelming hug. She demanded to know why she was approaching her so roughly, while Kudo continued her overly enthusiastic greeting. Marfa, the white-haired sister, noticed someone was missing and asked where Aster was. The Viscount replied with a mysterious smile, saying simply, "Oh, that boy." At once, Kudo's gaze hardened, her expression shifting from cheerful warmth to cold seriousness. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, a violent pillar of red energy erupted from Aster's sword. The young man struggled desperately to control the overwhelming power, leaping and swinging the blade again and again in an attempt to subdue it. At last he dropped to his knees, exhausted and drenched in sweat, cursing his inability to fully master the weapon, unaware that his sister was already searching for him. A single lock of his hair had turned white from the strain, though he could form a blade with magic. Suppressing the sword's true power drained everything he had. The forest clearing was scarred with craters, clear evidence of his struggle to control the sword Graham. As he wondered how his father managed to wield it so effortlessly, suddenly a familiar voice pulled him from his thoughts, teasing that she could see he was going all out again. Startled, Aster turned and greeted his sister Kudo, asking when she had returned. With a playful but sharp smile, she scolded him for not even coming to welcome his older sister home. Raising an eyebrow, she asked if he thought he was so special that his family did not matter to him. She mentioned she had heard about the sword dance, and that the Knight Academy was buzzing with rumors about him, adding that their father must be very proud. Aster brushed off the praise, insisting that she was the truly impressive one. Even as an apprentice, she had distinguished herself in numerous missions. He continued praising her, saying he had heard she was the only knight to receive the Medal of Honor that year. Kudo responded indifferently that if she could not accomplish at least that much, she would never be able to inherit their father's position. Then she fixed him with a steady gaze and asked directly whether he had rejected the offer to become heir out of consideration for her. Aster sighed, muttering how troublesome it was that their father had told her, and explained that he simply did not feel qualified yet. Kudo lowered her eyes thoughtfully for a moment. Then she turned and began walking away, complaining bitterly that both their father and Aster were cruel, knowing full well that it was her dream, yet still offering the inheritance to him. Her figure gradually disappeared among the trees, leaving Aster bewildered by her sudden change in mood. Without warning, she spun around and unleashed a powerful slash of blue energy straight at him. The attack sliced a tree clean in half as if it were butter, forcing Aster to narrowly dodge. The severe trunk crashed to the ground beside him, making him leap back to avoid being crushed. Landing lightly, he demanded to know what she was doing all of a sudden. Standing within a blazing aura of power, Kudo declared with a challenging smile that after all this time, his older sister would finally test him. With a fierce grin and her sword resting on her shoulder, she warned him that now she would come at him for real. Panic flickered across Aster's face as he tried to stop her, pleading for her to wait and explaining that his sword was still incomplete. She answered coldly, asking whether he could offer that same excuse to an enemy on the battlefield. The word enemy echoed in Aster's mind, forcing him to grasp the seriousness of the situation. Taking up a combat stance, Kudo reminded him that a knight's creed was to always be ready for battle and warned that if he held back too much, she would crush him. Her first strike was so powerful that he barely managed to evade it. Realizing this was no joke, as he leapt backward to escape her relentless assaults, he understood that he was already struggling just to keep his own magic under control. But when he saw the genuine killing intent in his sister's eyes, he knew he had no choice. Out of sheer desperation, he unleashed the crimson power of Gran, as the red energy of his blade collided violently with the blue aura surrounding her. A terrifying thought crossed his mind. She truly intended to kill him. The battle raged deeper into the forest, far from watchful eyes. From a distance, it looked as though lightning itself had descended among the trees. Burst of light flashing. Kudo clicked her tongue mid-swing, her blade cutting clean arcs through the air, her expression sharp and merciless. She told Aster that he was still as skilled with the sword as ever, admitting she had never expected him to keep pace with her after all the growth she had achieved at the Knight Academy. Aster blocked her relentless strikes one after another. She twisted her stance with practiced precision and unleashed a crushing blow that hurled him backward. Coldly, she declared that his control over mana was pathetic. Aster slid across the ground, boots digging deep grooves into the soil. Yet he forced himself to remain standing. Looking up at her, he remarked that she was just as merciless as he remembered. His thoughts drifted unwillingly to the past. Kudo had always been like this, fierce, confrontational, unyielding. As the only man in the family with the formal right to inherit, and as the bearer of a seven-winged crest superior to anyone else in the household, he had always stood as a silent thorn in her existence. To her, everything about him was unfair. She had grown into a storm that challenged every perceived injustice, and if he were honest, she was his natural enemy. Suddenly she leapt high into the air. In a moment Aster saw her silhouette rise against the canopy. He knew what was coming. Her sword descended like judgment itself. The impact split the forest floor, a violent shockwave exploding outward. Standing over him, She declared he was unworthy of becoming the next head of the family. Elsewhere, in their father's chamber, Alphen stood by the window, anxiety clear in her voice as she asked if it was truly wise to let those to fight alone. She feared that recklessness between siblings could end in death. Their father answered calmly that Aster and Kudo were rivals, reckless perhaps, but not foolish enough to cross that final line. Though still uneasy, Alphen pressed further, asking why they had truly been summoned back from the Night Academy. She sensed it was not merely about succession. Their father opened a drawer and withdrew a sealed envelope bearing the insignia of the Elmheim main family. The sight stole her breath. He explained it was a summons. The elders who controlled the family's core wished to see their grandchild in person. When she quietly asked if it was truly that serious, he replied without hesitation that, at worst, they could lose Aster. Back in the forest, the battle showed no sign of slowing. Their blades collided in rapid succession, shockwaves pulsing through the trees like a heartbeat of destruction. Amid the exchange, Aster told Kudo to stop speaking nonsense. He reminded her he had already refused the position of successor. She knew that better than anyone. Irritation twisted her features as she raised her sword high, declaring that his refusal was precisely what she found unacceptable. Her blade crashed down with overwhelming force. Aster barely caught it in time, and the weight of the strike stunned him. It felt less like facing a swordsman and more like bracing against a troll, swinging a massive warhammer. She pressed harder, pouring even more strength into the blow. At the final second, Aster twisted his wrist and flipped his blade, redirecting her strike into the ground. He demanded sharply whether she would finally listen. She only smiled faintly and asked if he was already trying to run. In the next heartbeat, she released her full brute strength. Aster was sent flying sideways, smashing into a tree so violently that bark exploded behind him. He coughed blood, disbelief flashing in his eyes. Kudo looked down at him and declared that if all he could do was swing a sword, he was third-rate. Even those who relied solely on mana were merely second-rate. Only those who mastered both sword and mana together deserved to be called first-rate. She told him she was deeply disappointed. The difference in wing crest, she explained, directly reflected mana capacity. Even a single wing meant nearly triple the power, though she bore 5 wings, and was technically inferior by default stages to his 7. He still avoided direct clashes of raw strength, choosing instead to hide behind refined technique. With a faint smile, she asked whether he truly lacked faith in himself, or whether he feared losing control again, like he had 3 years ago. Her words cut deeper than steel. Aster froze. The memory surfaced unbidden. Had he been afraid all along? Had he unconsciously sealed away his own power because of that incident? For the first time, he truly questioned himself. His gaze fell to his sword as he muttered whether that same suppression was why Sordran always felt unstable in his grasp. Kudo's expression hardened further. She told him he possessed everything she had ever wanted. If he intended to let those blessings rot through ignorance and arrogance, then he should hand them over to someone who understood their worth. She lunged, killing intent no longer restrained. This time, Aster did not retreat. He met her all-out strike head-on, their blades colliding with a thunderous roar that echoed across the forest. To her shock, she was forced back, her footing faltering as disbelief filled her eyes. She could hardly comprehend that he had deflected her full-powered attack. Aster offered a faint smile and thanked her. Because of her, he said, he had finally awakened. Then he surged forward at full speed. Kudo narrowed her eyes, confused by his reckless charge. Why would he attack before even stabilizing his blade? Was he out of mana? The thought seemed impossible. As he advanced, mana flooded into his sword in overwhelming torrents. The 7 wings upon his back concealed a vast, nearly inexhaustible reserve. He knew he could not yet control it with precision. So instead of forcing control, he abandoned restraint altogether. For a fleeting instant, he released his reliance on technique and poured every ounce of his mana into the pure motion of his strike. The blow descended with unstoppable force. Kudo raised her sword and blocked it cleanly, stabilizing herself at once, yet even as she held firm, she could feel the difference. Something within Aster had truly changed. Kudo steadied herself after blocking his strike and let out a small, amused smile. She asked whether he had truly thought this through, or if this was just another one of his half-baked impulses. Aster met her eyes without wavering. There was no hesitation left in him now. He told her plainly that he had no intention of wasting the second life. This time, he would seize everything that had once slipped through his fingers. The power of the 7 wings, the sword Graham, even his place within the family. These were things he had desperately struggled for before, and never managed to claim. At the word second life, Kudo stiffened for the briefest instant. Shock flickered across her face, subtle but unmistakable. In that tiny opening, Aster moved. Mana surged violently into his blade as he closed the distance in a blink. He leapt high into the air, gathering every ounce of power he possessed. His sword poised to fall with absolute finality, and then he vanished. Kudo's eyes widened as she lost sight of him mid-air. But Aster had not disappeared. He had dropped low instead, compressing his mana even further. forcing it into a tighter, denser current. The pressure around him intensified as he poured everything into the blade. He declared openly that there would be no more restraint. Kudo felt the shift immediately. The air itself grew heavy. She understood at once that the fight was about to end. Aster brought his sword down with overwhelming force, the air screaming as it split beneath the descending arc of mana. Sometime later, Kudo slowly opened her eyes not to the forest, but to the familiar ceiling of her own room. For a moment, she did not understand how she had gotten there. Sunlight filtered through parted curtains where her older sister, Manhwa, stood quietly by the window. Manhwa turned and calmly remarked that Kudo had taken quite a long time to wake up. Kudo pushed herself upright at once, her voice sharp as she demanded to know what had happened to the duel. What was the outcome? Manhwa smiled gently and explained that Aster had carried her back himself. He had told everyone that Kudo had fallen asleep in the middle of the fight. According to him, the exhaustion from her journey back from the Night Academy had finally caught up with her, and she had simply lost consciousness. Kudo lowered her gaze to her sword in silence. That was not true. She remembered the final instant clearly. Aster's blade had stopped mere inches from her. She had felt the crushing pressure of his mana, enough to split her in two. And yet, just before the strike connected, he had dispersed the mana blade. Only the lingering shockwave had brushed against her body, enough to send her into unconsciousness. In that moment, she understood something simple and undeniable. No matter what he said, Aster would never kill his own sister. And yet, for a heartbeat, she had believed he might. A faint smile touched her lips. Younger than her, and yet he had grown into something infuriatingly formidable. What an unbearable little brother he had become. She rose abruptly, gripping her sword, and asked Manhwa where Aster was. Her eyes sharpened as she declared she would not accept a duel that ended like that. The next time, they would begin again at full strength from the very start. Manhwa's expression shifted slightly. She told Kudo that Aster had already left the castle. Kudo froze where she stood. Manhwa explained that the main house had summoned him, and earlier that day he had departed alongside their father. Seeing the confusion on Kudo's face, she asked whether she truly had not known about the summons. Anger flared in Kudo's voice as she demanded why no one had told her. Meanwhile, a horse-drawn carriage rolled steadily along the forest road beyond the castle grounds. Inside, Aster sat across from his father in silence. His father explained that the one Aster was about to meet was among the old lords who secretly supported the Elmheim family, even though they had retired from public leadership. The former heads of both the main and branch families and the powerful elders beneath them still held overwhelming authority. They no longer stood in the spotlight, but they ruled quietly from the shadows. He added that those elders had never once shown the slightest interest in Aster. After his adoption, for them to summon him now was not a trivial matter. Aster listened calmly and replied that it was most likely connected to the sword dance assembly. He mentioned that he had heard the elders of Elmheim valued the family's honor above all else, above gold, above life itself. Anyone who stained that honor, he said, would be thrown into a beast cage's feed. His father stared at him in disbelief and demanded to know where he had heard such an outrageous story. Slightly flustered, Aster answered that he had heard it somewhere long ago. Then, more steadily, he said he was prepared for whatever awaited him, punishment or exile alike. After a brief silence, his father asked whether it truly did not trouble him to leave without saying goodbye to Kudo. Aster smiled faintly and said it was fine. Their departures had been scheduled around the same time anyway. It was better, he believed, if he was not around. Since Kudo disliked him, she would likely feel more at ease in his absence. He added that thanks to her, he had finally begun to understand how to properly wield the sword Graham. He could now draw out the power of the 7 wings more freely than before. With steady eyes, he told his father that whatever happened next, he should not come to rescue him. He was ready to survive on his own. His father opened his mouth, clearly about to scold him for such reckless words. But before he could speak, a voice rang out from outside the carriage, questioning why Aster was acting so dramatic when he was the youngest among them. Aster's eyes widened in shock. Clinging to the side of the moving carriage was Kudo herself. Her expression was sharp, stubborn, and unmistakably alive with challenge as she glared at him. Without hesitation, she climbed into the moving carriage, as if the journey ahead had always included her. Kudo climbed fully into the carriage without the slightest hesitation and immediately turned on Aster, her eyes blazing. She demanded to know why he had slipped away without saying a single word to his older sister. Her tone carried both anger and disbelief. She added that she had heard about the summons from the elders of the main house and honor, or perhaps a threat that neither she nor Manhwa had ever once received. Hifried's voice cut in firmly, reminding her that she could not accompany them to the main house. The matter was too sensitive, too dangerous to involve her. But Kudo calmly took a seat beside Aster, her posture steady. She replied that she already understood the situation. She knew their father had called her and Manhwa back from the Night Academy to guard the estate during his absence. She was not foolish enough to miss that implication. Still, her expression hardened as she added that a summons from the main house meant the situation was serious enough to demand extreme caution. Manhwa herself had warned that there was a real possibility Aster might not return. Aster brushed it off with a calm smile, saying she was overthinking it. He claimed he was merely going to talk and would come back soon enough. Yet deep inside, he understood the truth. Whether he would return safely was far from certain. Kudo suddenly raised a finger and pointed it directly at him. She told him to listen carefully, bluntly, without softening her words. She admitted that she hated him. Aster blinked, caught off guard, but she did not hesitate. She hated that he was a man in a family where that alone granted him advantages. She hated that he bore 7 wings. She hated that he was always treated as someone special. She hated that he was stronger than his older sisters. She hated that he carried himself with maturity despite being the youngest. She hated every bit of it. Then, slowly, her voice softened. No matter how much she despised those unfair things, he was still family. No matter how strong he acted, no matter how composed he seemed, he was still her little brother. Rising to her feet, proud and unshaken, she ordered him to come back properly so they could settle their duel again. This time, they would begin at full power from the start. A faint smile curved her lips as she added that she would not allow him to escape with such a cheap victory. And with that, she leapt from the moving carriage as effortlessly as she had climbed aboard. Aster quickly leaned out, startled, asking his father why she had gone through the trouble of coming all this way just for that. Hifrid watched her shrinking figure with a proud expression and replied that, to him, it sounded like a proper farewell. Aster's lips curved into a quiet smile. As he looked back, he saw Kudo standing on the road behind them, waiting boldly at the departing carriage. In his heart, he thanked her, and silently, with firm resolve, he made himself a promise no matter what awaited him at the main house, he would return. Then we are shown Viscount Hifrid and Aster, who have already arrived at the main residence of the Elmheim family. The moment they step onto the estate grounds, a guide team is there to receive them. Their captain greets them formally and says, "The Grand Elder is already waiting inside." Hearing this, Viscount Hifrid calmly replies, "There is no need for a guide. I know the way." However, the captain firmly refuses. "We cannot allow that. We have been strictly ordered to escort you both together." From the atmosphere alone, Aster can already tell that they were not summoned merely out of familial affection for a grandson. It doesn't feel like that kind of welcome. There is a certain tension in the air, something stiff and deliberate. And yet, as his eyes drift across the familiar surroundings, a faint sense of nostalgia washes over him. How nostalgic. It's been a while since I've been home. His gaze lingers quietly on the estate as memories surface, but he says nothing. With no other choice, they proceed inside alongside the guides. As they walk, Viscount Hifrid speaks in a low but serious tone. "I assume you understand, Aster. Don't get hot-headed, at least not today. No matter what is said to you." Aster listens, then answers without hesitation. "That depends on how the other side acts." His father exhales slightly and replies, "I am saying that the other side is the problem. Listen carefully. The person we are about to meet is..." Before he can finish, Aster, still looking elsewhere rather than at his father, interrupts casually. "Darius is nowhere to be seen." He continues in the same indifferent tone. "Well, since his dominant hand was crushed, a return is likely difficult for the time being." At that, Viscount Hifrid looks at him sharply and asks, "Are you even listening?" Aster, pulled back from his thoughts, Aster answers simply yes. Aster then adds calmly, "For today, I will be as silent as a clam, since sister told me to come back safely." By now, they have reached a massive door. It slowly begins to open, the heavy sound echoing through the corridor. As they step inside, the captain of the guards announces in a loud, formal voice, "Lord Hifrid and his son have arrived." Seated at the far end of the grand hall, an elderly figure speaks with a measured tone. "You've finally come. Has it been over 10 years?" Father and son move forward together. Another voice follows, slightly amused. My grandson, Hifrid." Viscount Hifrid immediately drops to his knees and bows deeply, lowering his head in full respect. "It has been a long time. 6th head. No, Great Grand Elder." Aster, meanwhile, keeps his composure. As he feels the weight of the man's gaze upon him, a thought crosses his mind. That is the monster lurking in the shadows of Elmheim. The main house's 6th head, Zenith A. Elmheim. Around him sit the true heavyweights who stand beneath the Elmheim. Named figures of immense authority and influence. Among them are a few faces Aster recognizes from the Sword Dance Festival. His eyes scan the hall briefly before he asks, almost casually, "Is Roderick not here?" There is a flicker of surprise in his expression, but before anyone else can respond, the 6th head speaks sharply. "That man is not here, brat. He is the head of the knights who directly serve the royalty." After all, the atmosphere in the room remains heavy, charged with authority and unspoken tension. At that moment, an overwhelming and terrifying aura begins to pour from the elder's body, thick and suffocating, pressing down on the entire hall like an invisible weight. His presence alone feels enough to dominate the room as he continues coldly. He has no time to busy himself with vulgar matters. "So, we old soldiers are being considerate and handling the administrative duties, Aster." Hearing this, Aster remains outwardly calm, but his thoughts move quietly beneath the surface. "I didn't care before, because in my previous life I never even had the chance to see them. but to gather this many executives without the current head present. For a retired man, he still throws around quite a lot of weight. The influence of the sixth head is undeniable. Even in retirement, his authority seems absolute. Viscount Highfried finally speaks, his voice controlled but firm. And what are these vulgar matters? Zenith A. Elmheim, the sixth head, lets out a low laugh. Ha ha. You have already guessed, haven't you? His sharp eyes shift slightly toward Aster as he continues. I heard your pet dog made quite a mess at the sword dance festival. The insult hangs heavily in the air, deliberate and cutting. As the tension in the hall grows even thicker, Aster lowers his gaze for a brief moment, then looks forward again, his golden eyes steady and unshaken. As I thought, it's about that, he says to himself, already having anticipated this direction. Viscount Highfried responds calmly after hearing the accusation. If this is about that matter, the current head, Roderick settled it himself and closed the case. But the elder immediately dismisses that argument. That was merely a performance for the public. Zenith A. Elmheim says coldly. It does not change the fact that the Elmheim reputation has been tarnished. Adopting a child of unknown origin was a mistake in itself. We would have overlooked it had he remained harmless, but his voice hardens, and the atmosphere grows heavier with every word. It is a different story if he bears his fangs at the main house. There is no choice but to banish him. At that instant, an overwhelming killing intent floods the hall, far more intense than before. The pressure is suffocating, bearing down mercilessly. Of course, the sixth head continues, his eyes fixed forward. You will not escape suitable punishment either, Lord Highfried. The threat is unmistakable, and the room falls into a tense, breathless silence. After hearing everything, Aster speaks up firmly. Wait, I did everything myself. Father has nothing to do with it. At that moment, Viscount Highfried says nothing. He does not stop his son, nor does he support him aloud. Seeing his father remain silent, Aster gradually steadies himself and falls quiet as well. Zenith A. Elmheim watches the exchange with sharp, unreadable eyes before speaking again. As I thought, he lacks discipline. For a child to try and interrupt while adults are speaking. With that, the sixth head slowly rises from his seat. The movement alone shifts the atmosphere in the hall, making it feel even heavier. We lead 12,000 knights under our banner, he declares in a deep, commanding voice. We bear the signboard named Elmheim. However, the knights are not a monolith. There are countless individuals vigilantly aiming for that top seat. His gaze sweeps across the gathered executives and elders. Naturally, even in this very place, the meaning behind his words is unmistakable. Power within Elmheim is not stable, it is constantly contested. And in a hall filled with ambitious figures, even a small crack in reputation can become a weapon. Zenith A. Elmheim steps forward once more and speaks in a measured, chilling tone. We only want peace of mind. Proof that you are not someone who will bring harm to Elmheim. With that, he gestures and a sword is presented toward Viscount Highfried. The blade itself radiates an overwhelming and violent aura, its energy spilling into the hall like a storm barely contained. Do you remember? The sixth head continues coldly. Even when you failed to protect your liege and dragged Elmheim's name through the mud, we had Roderick cut off that arm right here. As he releases an even heavier wave of killing intent, the pressure becomes almost suffocating. This time, he declares mercilessly, cut off that brat's head, and we will consider this matter closed. The words strike like a blade. Viscount Highfried does not hesitate. I refuse, he says firmly. If I must cut down my own child, I would gladly take my own life instead. His voice carries no fear, only absolute resolve. Hearing this, Aster could only whisper, Father, but no other words follow. He finds himself unable to speak further. The sixth head remains standing, his oppressive pressure still flooding the room, crushing and relentless. His expression does not soften. In that case, he says calmly, yet with terrifying finality, you should die. Your wife, your daughters, that brat there, everyone. The hall falls into a deathly silence as his threat hangs in the air like an executioner's blade poised to fall. As of today, the Viscount house is dissolved. The declaration falls like a final verdict. At once, numerous knights surge forward, moving to carry out the order. Steel flashes in the hall as they advance, surrounding Viscount Highfried with drawn swords, their killing intent fully unleashed. Seeing his father encircled by blades on all sides, Aster steps forward and raises his voice. Why are you so frightened, Grand Elder? Zenith A. Elmheim narrows his eyes. What? Aster does not back down. His golden gaze remains steady as he continues, his tone sharp and fearless. If you are afraid of being bitten by a pet dog, then grown adults huddling together and trembling like this is unsightly. The hall grows still, shocked by his audacity. Banishment, execution, do whatever you like, Aster goes on. But if you intend to lay a hand on my family. As he speaks, he begins removing his shirt without hesitation. His father watches in silence, fully aware of what his son is about to reveal. Before turning back to face the elders, Aster speaks softly toward his father. I'm sorry. It seems I'm not very good at staying silent after all. A knight nearby stares in disbelief and blurts out, what is that? That wing emblem on his back. Aster stands tall, revealing the mark clearly. At that time, he declares, his voice echoing through the chamber, these 7 wings will become Elmheim's enemy. Think it over carefully. The threat is no longer hidden. It is direct, absolute, and impossible to ignore. Seeing this, one person says, "Impossible. Could that be? The 7 wings emblem?" Another elder says, "That's fake. For hundreds of years, that thing appearing on a human body has." The fat elder says, "However, that crest is unmistakably." Seeing all of this unfold, Zenith A. Elmheim steps forward, his voice sharp and heavy with meaning. "Do you understand the meaning of what you are showing us right now? Do you truly understand?" His words hang in the air, tense and pressing. Hearing this, Astor responds almost casually, though there's a strange confidence behind his tone. "Isn't it obvious? The more wings there are, the more shocked people become." At that moment, the scene shifts to a blue-haired figure watching everything closely. Instead of panic, a quiet laugh escapes him. "No, no, excuse me. Please, continue." His amusement contrasts sharply with the atmosphere. Meanwhile, another person nearby looks deeply unsettled, clearly disturbed by what they are witnessing. Observing everyone's reactions, Zenith speaks again, this time explaining with grave seriousness. "To begin with, the wing emblem is an organ used to generate magical power, a power that spirits shared with humans long ago. By passing that power down from parent to child, humans were able to deepen and strengthen it over generations. However, there has never been anyone who reached 7 wings." His statement sends a ripple through the room. Aster's expression tightens slightly. "Are you saying that I belong to the spirit clan?" Zenith meets his gaze steadily. "If your 7 wings are real, then perhaps, indeed." The tension thickens. At the same time, we see Viscount Highfried watching his son in stunned silence. The weight of the revelation is evident on his face. But Aster steps forward, unwavering. "I am a child of the Viscount house," he declares firmly. "At this point, my birth does not matter." His voice grows colder, sharper, filled with resolve. "What I want to ask right now is whether or not you all have the determination to make an enemy of me." The air itself seems to freeze as his words echo, turning the revelation of 7 wings into something far more dangerous. A declaration of challenge. Continuing without the slightest hesitation, he speaks in a calm but calculating tone. "Suppose I were to be driven out of Elmheim. There would most likely be many among the martial nobility who would gladly welcome the 7 wings. And if that were to happen, then for those of you who already live in fear of rebellion, it would become a far greater threat." His words are not loud, yet they strike with precision. "Rather than casting me aside, you should want to keep me close at hand." A symbol that surpasses even Duke Roderick himself. The signboard known as the 7 wings. At that moment, there is not even the faintest trace of fear in his eyes. No doubt, no hesitation, only clarity. Hearing this, every member seated in that chamber grows visibly uneasy. The weight of his reasoning settles over them like a storm cloud. What he is suggesting is not merely personal survival, it is political leverage. A shift in power, a dangerous possibility that none of them can easily ignore. Meanwhile, inside his own mind, Aster thinks quietly to himself. Just as that old man said earlier, Elmheim is not a single united force. Cracks already exist beneath the surface. In fact, a rebellion will happen. A massive civil war that will swallow the entire country. He has seen that future once before. For the sake of his own survival and for the survival of the Viscount house, he knows he cannot remain passive. At the very least, right here and right now, I must determine who stands as an enemy and who can be an ally, even if it means taking risks. The resolve within him hardens. This is no longer just about 7 wings, nor about noble pride. It is about preparing for the inevitable storm that only he knows is coming. Hearing all of this, Zenith A. Elmheim responds with undisguised anger, his authority pressing down on the entire chamber. "You think you possess that much worth?" he demands sharply. "There isn't even any proof that those 7 wings are real." His words are meant to crush the momentum. Aster is built, doubt, authority, intimidation. But instead of retreating, Aster smiles. "If you believe they aren't real," he replies calmly, almost provokingly, "then kill me quickly." The room falls silent. At that moment, he continues, "It will become a war between me and all of you." Inside, however, his thoughts move carefully behind that fearless expression. Killing someone like me right now would be easy. But if Elmheim truly becomes serious about this, what will they choose to do? Will they take the bait? He is gambling, not recklessly, but deliberately. He knows they cannot act carelessly, not when uncertainty surrounds the 7 wings. As tension tightens like a drawn bowstring, the blue-haired man suddenly rises to his feet, clapping his hands lightly as if amused by the entire exchange. The conversation seems to be going in circles. Grand Elder. Then, turning slightly toward the others, he proposes smoothly for now. "How about we impose a trial on him?" At this, the heavy-set elder stiffens in protest. "Count Maze." "What are you?" Count Maze interrupts without losing his relaxed composure. "Because you want to see it, don't you?" he says with a faint smile. The power of the 7 wings. His gaze sharpens slightly. It won't be too late to decide his fate after that. The air shifts once more. What began as an argument has now turned into something far more dangerous, a test that could either prove Aster's claim or seal his destruction. How about it? The blue-haired noble presses smoothly. This is the mansion of the world-renowned martial clan. Surely you can prepare one, or to suitable trials. Hearing that name, Aster's thoughts sharpen. Did he say Count Maze? There's no mistake. This man is an ally. The realization settles firmly in his mind. The timing of the suggestion, the direction of the conversation. It was a lifeline disguised as curiosity. After a long pause, Zenith A. Elmheim finally speaks. Very well. Follow me. His tone is cold, but controlled. Teaching a lesson to a grandson who does not know how to speak properly is also an old man's duty. With that, he turns and leads them away. They arrive before a heavy structure. This is the trial grounds. It's quite dark. Zenith begins to explain as they stand before the entrance. Beyond this darkness lies an underground bunker connected to the waterways. It was originally constructed as an evacuation shelter for emergencies. However, we are currently keeping a single magic beast there. He pauses deliberately. The trial is simple. Defeat that magic beast. That is all. The simplicity of the words only makes the challenge feel heavier. Upon hearing this, Viscount Highfried sighs deeply, unable to hide his frustration. Good grief. He was such a troublesome child, always crying and screaming. And yet, I told you so many times to keep the existence of the seven wings hidden. There is disappointment in his voice, but also worry. Aster listens silently. Then, without arguing further, he steps forward and places his hand on the door. I can't keep something so conspicuous hidden forever, he says calmly as he pushes it open. This was the perfect opportunity. The heavy door creaks as darkness spills outward, thick and cold. Whatever waits inside is not just a beast, it is proof. And Aster walks toward it without hesitation. Hearing his son's determination, Viscount Highfried calls out to him one last time, his voice carrying both authority and concern. Don't let your guard down, okay? Aster answers without hesitation. I'm off. With that, he turns and briefly looks toward the blue-haired noble. Count Maze is smiling quietly, as if observing everything with calm interest. That faint smile lingers in Aster's mind as he begins his descent. As he steps into the underground bunker, darkness surrounds him. The air is damp and heavy, the silence thick. It is undeniably dark, yet not so dark that he cannot see. And then he notices it, a severed head lying on the ground. Even in the dim light, the sight is unmistakable. At that moment, a voice echoes down from above, cold and detached. I even gave that one a chance to clear his name, though he just cried and screamed until the very end. It was unbearable to watch. They are speaking about Duke Roderick's son, the very head lying before him. The voice continues, carrying a faint warning. Don't disappoint me now. The meaning is clear. This is not merely a test. It is judgment. Suddenly, the ground seems to tremble. A massive presence emerges from the darkness. In front of Aster, a gigantic and terrifyingly powerful beast stands there. Its roar shaking the entire underground chamber. The sound is so fierce that it feels as though the walls themselves might crack under the pressure. Aster tightens his grip on his sword. The blade gleams faintly in the darkness. Above, the declaration comes once more, firm and merciless. Now then, let the trial begin.